We all have that inner critic, that voice that whispers judgment about others and ourselves. It's quick to label, to assume, to decide who's right and who's wrong. And so while judgment can be a natural human response, being judgmental can erode your relationships and seriously hinder your personal growth. Yeah, it feels great at first, but it gives you a hit of certainty and a sense of superiority and this illusion of control. But over time, it poisons your perspective and isolates you from the very connection you crave. So today, we'll talk about why you judge, the problems it causes, and my 8 steps to help you become less judgmental. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the podcast. And judgment. We're going to talk all about judgment today and being judgmental and how to start being less judgmental and all the things. So I think this is, I think this is 101 for every human in the world. And my experience is that people are judgmental in very serious ways and sort of sloughing it off as, well, it's my opinion and I'm allowed my opinion. And I even wonder if you realize that it's your opinion versus a judgment that's coming from somewhere else, that maybe your opinion is actually different if you weren't sort of in a negative place of judging. So we're going to talk about all that today. So why is being judgmental a problem? And really there are 3 main problems with being judgmental there's a lot, but I'm going to talk about 3. The first and foremost is that it erodes relationship and connection. That's number 1, and that's probably the real reason I'm talking about today. Judging other people leads to defensiveness, resentment, communication breakdowns, all of it. And by the way, on both sides, people who feel judged are definitely less likely to open up or to trust others. Makes sense, right? And that's going to lead to distancing, to strained connections with other people. And there have been way too many studies. And as always, I will link to all the research if you're watching on YouTube below the video, and otherwise on my website. When you go to this particular episode on my website, either on the podcast page or the relationship tips and tools page where the blog lives, all of the resources, everything I mentioned will be in one of those places. So I will tell you that there are way too many studies where it's been found that people who perceive judgment from their peers or people close to them, that they report significantly higher interpersonal anxiety and significantly lower relationship satisfaction. So that is just across the board. And you know it, because if you feel judged, do you feel close? Do you feel calm and relaxed in the relationship? No. So, and by the way, those are studies. The studies take into account, different cultures, gender, age. This is definitely a cross-cultural experience when it comes to judgment in many different ways. The second big problem with judgment is that it limits personal growth, for sure. Because when you focus on other people's flaws, you often ignore your own. And that's from the research too. And that projection, protects your ego, your ego. That projection definitely protects your ego, but it stalls your self-development. It's going to interrupt your self-development. And judgment is, a defense mechanism most of the time. And it's rooted in shame. It's rooted in fear. And it allows you to displace the discomfort you feel about yourself onto someone else. So I know people who are judgmental often seem like they're arrogant or something, but they're really full of shame. I will tell you that. No, you don't feel a big need to, and that's you. I say with love, that's you. That's me when I'm judging. And the third big problem is that there's a lot of mental health impact. Judging others, absolutely, again, from the research, can increase your own anxiety and stress levels because it really creates an internal atmosphere, an internal environment of negativity and dissatisfaction. And a lot of research shows that people who with high levels of self-judgment, they really experience greater emotional dysregulation and depressive symptoms. So it's bad for you on every level. And really, again, that's why I say this should be like 101. You really need to look at your judgment. Now, but before we get into that, how to do it. Let's talk about why we judge. What are the origins of judging? So, because if it's so harmful to us in our relationships, why do we do it? And there are, again, kind of three. I like to use three of things. 3 to 5 is usually what I do. But to me, it's sort of all distilled down to about 3 main reasons why we judge others. And one is really an evolutionary perspective, I would say. In early human history, think about this. Judging quickly was a survival tool. You had to decide very quickly whether someone was a friend or a foe, if they were safe or dangerous. And it had real consequences if you judged incorrectly. So those like fast judgments, which are powered by your amygdala, which I talk about all the time in your brain, the fear part of your brain, they're still at play today, even though they're no longer adaptive, right? They're no longer needed in the same way. 2 are psychological factors. Judgment often functions as a psychological defense, as I already said. So when we feel shame, anxiety, inadequacy, judging someone else allows us to distance from our own pain. And these judgments, they may feel protective, but they're really reinforcing fear-based thinking over being compassionate and loving and kind. And then the third big reason why we judge is that it's a cognitive shortcut. So we rely on what we call in psychology heuristics. Heuristics are pretty much they're mental shortcuts. Okay. But I like to throw around I like to give you the big words. I hope you realize I never talk down to you. I never talk like you're dumb or can't understand something. I want, if you're listening, it's because you are intelligent and you might not consider yourself book smart when you're listening. I know you might not, I know most of you not have as much schooling as I've had because it's ridiculous the amount of schooling I've had and no one should really. But I know you're smart. And you can, so I always want to give you sort of the top level of things because I want you to really understand context. That's why I give you context so that when I give you the tips, they make sense. You think, oh, I value these action steps because they come from the research. I understand why I'm this way. And now I want to take action. Right. And that's why I do it this way. So we rely on heuristics. Now you have a new word, or maybe you have an old word, which again are these mental shortcuts to quickly process information, okay? Because the brain has so much coming at it all the time. But these shortcuts often reinforce bias. And recently I talked about confirmation bias and, your RAS and other podcasts. So you get what I'm talking about. But I would say, a really classic example of heuristics of these mental shortcuts is this something called the fundamental attribution error. And that is that we judge others based on their character, right? We say like they're irresponsible, but we explain our own actions in context. Well, I was late because traffic was bad, right? It's not, we don't judge our character on it. I didn't mean to cut that person off. So, I'm a good person. But if someone cut us off, they're an asshole, they're a jerk, they're this, right? We go right after their character. But when it's something that we do, we might have done the exact same thing, but we, come up with a contextual reason why. That is a good example of, these mental shortcuts that we play. This fundamental attribution error is a good thing to learn anyway. There you go. Okay. And I want to talk, I want to talk too about culture and gender differences in judgment because I think it's really important in this discussion that, again, you're educated, you have a broader sense of what I'm talking about. Otherwise it's very easy just to kind of have buzzwords and jump around. So because judgment isn't a one size fits all, problem, phenomenon, whatever. What we judge and how we judge is deeply, deeply shaped by our culture, by our gender roles, or whatever we grew up with. So if you've ever thought, why is that such a big deal to that person? Or, or why do I react more emotionally than other people do? I would guess that culture or gender socialization was somehow in the mix. And that's why I want to talk about it. So I want to talk about, let me talk about cultural differences first. And I want to talk about kind of an East versus West, or a collectivist versus individualist thing. All right. Because this podcast is downloaded all over the world. Thank you. I love that you all are everywhere. So I feel like I have to say something here about how different cultural influences impact how much or how little you might judge. And it would be obviously impossible for me to cover I think we're at 190 countries now where you download this podcast. So it would really be impossible to cover every country and culture. I mean, even think of all the cultures within each country. My gosh. So when I was formulating today, I thought, maybe I could at least talk about collectivist versus individualist countries as a place to begin that conversation, because judgment has been studied quite a bit in the research when we talk about collectivist or individualist countries. So let me explain what I mean. In collectivist cultures, and collectivist cultures are common in a lot of parts of Asia, think China, Japan, Korea, India, think Africa, Latin America. All these countries are really known as collectivist overall. So in those kind of societies, moral judgment would often emphasize like group harmony, loyalty, a social obligation. Okay, so behaviors would be judged based on how they affect the community, the family unit. And in those contexts, someone who disrupts harmony, even if you have good intentions, is probably going to be judged more harshly than someone who quietly complies. And again, you could be living in the United States, but come from a collectivist culture, or you could be living in any Western, individualist country and come from a collectivist, or vice versa, and see that you're having a hard time with some of this stuff, right? With quote unquote fitting in. Because in contrast, individualist cultures, and for that, think, obviously the United States, Canada, Australia, the UK, I'd say much of Western Europe, they tend to prioritize, these kind of individualistic cultures tend to prioritize autonomy, independence, personal rights. So judgment here would often center around whether someone is authentic or violating someone's freedom. So a good example might be that, let me think of a good example. Here's a good one. A person who quits their job to travel. Okay. So a person, let's say I quit my job to travel. In a collectivist culture, I would likely be seen as selfish or even irresponsible. But in an individualist culture, I might be seen as brave or self-actualized. Do you see that? I know, really different, right? The same thing. And I would say even the research says, even core kind of moral dilemmas, and a lot of the research that I saw was talking about there's a famous, something called the trolley problem. There's a famous sort of, this would show how different judgment patterns would depend on your different cultural background. So if you don't know the trolley problem, it's a classic thought experiment in philosophy or in moral philosophy. And it sets up like, okay, there's a runaway trolley. It's heading down a track towards 5 people who will be killed if it continues down that track. You're standing next to a lever. If you pull it, the trolley will switch to another track, but there's one person on that second track who's going to be killed instead. Do you pull the lever? Okay. And right now, a lot of you are just going, well, of course I'd pull the lever. Yeah. It's not a question to you, or it's not a question that you wouldn't pull the lever. So people who are that's what's so interesting. That's why it's this really great experiment. So people who have what are known as, utilitarian ethics, or it's also known as consequentialism. Again, so those things are commonly seen in individualist cultures, since that's what we're talking about. they have a core belief that the right thing to do is whatever produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So they'll have a focus on outcomes and consequences, right? So sacrificing one person to save five others is not only morally acceptable, it's what you would want to do because the net outcome benefits more people. Okay. So you're right. Some of you are like, well, yeah. On the other side are people with what are called, what do we call that? Deontological ethics or duty-based ethics. These are more prevalent in these collectivist cultures I mentioned. And their core belief is that some actions are inherently right or inherently wrong, regardless of the outcome. It doesn't matter. So they're going to have more of a focus on rules, on duties, moral principles. So for them, even if killing one person could save five, it's still wrong because killing is inherently immoral. So the end doesn't justify the means, right? Do you see where I'm going? So a Westerner might say, well, I'd pull the lever. Saving five is, of course, better than saving one. But a person from East Asia might say, well, I couldn't pull it. Taking a life actively, even to save others, feels wrong. I wouldn't do that. Do you see? And you might be sitting there going, well, no, it's crazy. Of course, it's better to say no. Like, again, it's based on a lot of factors, what you think is so right or so wrong. And there's also, of course, gender differences, right? Social conditioning, moral reasoning, research, it really shows that I would say what I would call meaningful gender differences in how people make moral judgments and how they express or internalize judgment. And I don't want to get into I'm going to talk about men and women right now. I've spoken before on the podcast that it's, just like I can't include every culture in every single thing I talk about. I do tend to, if non-binary folks are listening, please take this all with the grain of salt it's intended. So women on average tend to favor a care-based, is that a good way to say that? A care-based moral framework. They're more likely to weigh how a decision affects relationships, how it affects emotional well-being. And of course, this often comes with increased engagement, right? Emotional engagement, which can make judgment feel more personal. They can be more self-critical. Where men, on the other hand, are often, again, I'm using broad brushstrokes, often socialized to adopt more of what we would call a justice-based moral lens. So they're going to prioritize fairness and rules and logic. They may judge based on principles rather than maybe an emotional nuance. And really, they're often taught explicitly or implicitly, to suppress vulnerability or, anything that's considered in that term weak, which leads to more what I would call kind of externalized judgment, putting it out there. So an example, Abby, give me an example. An example might be that, a woman might harshly judge herself for saying no to a friend in need because, she's been conditioned, right, to prioritize emotional caretaking. Whereas a man might judge someone, where a man wouldn't have that same reaction, okay? A man might judge someone for breaking a rule regardless of the context because they're raised with a more maybe strong, like kind of moral binaries with right, wrong, winner, loser, right? Hopefully those make sense. Whereas again, women might not do that same thing. I know that my wonderful Gary can be very black and white with things in a way that I am not. It's the rules. It's it. That's it. You did it. It's wrong. It's wrong or right. And I have more of and what about mitigating circumstances? And in this case, and you have this relationship, so this is a little different, that kind of thing. And again, you could be a man who thinks that way and a woman who thinks black and white, give me a break. I think we all know the spirit to which I'm saying things. But so, because I want to say these aren't hardwired differences. These are socially shaped patterns. And of course, culture and gender intersect, they overlap, they evolve. But, understanding these frameworks, to me, like the reason I talk about them is because it can help you pause and ask, is this judgment really mine? Was I taught to think this way? I'm hoping it helps you with your metacognition. Metacognition is your thinking about your thinking, your ability to step back and really look at your biases and where they come from, and if something's a fact or not. I'm always amazed at how many facts people have. It just is. It's bad. It's wrong. I don't like it. Again, based on what? And you're allowed to have it. If you ask me right now, is incest ever okay? I'm always going to say no. I'm like, no. And I'm very clear on what it's based on. I am. And I've actually worked with people where they had incest and they thought it was okay. And I mean, I've as you imagine, 40 years of doing therapy, I've been with rapists and all kinds of things, okay, that I do not agree with. Racists, bigotry, all kinds of things that I am like, nope, never okay, whatever that is. And I'm very aware of how I'm talking about something with someone, trying to understand at least where they're coming from, even if I don't agree with it, so that I can figure out a way that maybe we could talk about something. Okay? Like, how do we get somewhere together? Can we get somewhere together? And I would say most of the time, though, our judgment isn't around such black and white issues like incest or murder or rape or whatever, right? That feel more black and white. Most of the time, our judgment is because you don't like the way someone did something. I just had something come up where I'm going to make it short, but basically, Gary and I were invited to a wedding, a family member's wedding, and my son Max wanted to go, and I thought, and it only had the two of us, right? I wasn't trying to invite more people, and I said to them, "Hey, Max wants to come instead of Gary." And Gary's not blood relative to these people, whereas Max, this is his cousins, and because it's a wedding, a lot of family would be getting together, a lot of people maybe he hasn't even met yet, some cousins and things, and my wonderful Max wanted to go, so I asked. And they said no. They said, nope, you can't substitute. And they had all their reasons and all that. And I, of course, in my head, personally, I do have, I could judge that and go, well, that's not what I would do, right? That's not what I would do. And I think it's crazy that you would want someone who's not related to us over someone who is, right? Just because they're my hubby, my partner versus something else. But I really accepted it. I was like, you know what? It's their wedding, not mine. They are allowed to do whatever they want. That's fine. And I have and had no hard feelings about it. No, I totally understand. It's their day. They're so allowed to decide how they want their day. And that's great. And I can still choose whether I want to go or not. And even if I don't go, it doesn't have to be from some angry place. But I was telling one of my brothers about it the other day on the phone, and he was very upset. He goes, well, I don't even want to go now if that's what they did. He got so caught up. I was just telling him I might not go. I was trying to explain why. And because it's a very expensive trip to take to go to this wedding. It's going to be a lot of money. And I thought, well, if I'm not bringing, the kids, I just didn't, I want to spend my money in certain ways, right? That's all. And if it was going to be more like a family reunion thing with one of my kids, it felt different to spend the money than if it was like Gary and I just showing up at this thing. So again, because those are my judgments and my values and my things, and it is okay. But and so here I am having to talk my brother off the ledge. But do you see what I mean? Like he had and I was like, wait a minute, this didn't even happen to you. And they are allowed to do whatever they want. I have no hard feelings. Why are you having hard feelings? Like he was just so black and white about it. It's wrong. It's stupid. It's this, it's that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, cut it out. Cut it out. This is fine. This is them. This should not affect you at all in what you do, unless the only way you were going is if all your siblings went, maybe. And that was another thing I had. My sister's not going. So if my sister was going, I would have gone no matter what, because all the siblings would be together, because my brothers are back east, where this wedding is. And my sister's here on the West Coast with me. So anyway, there was a lot of mitigating factors. But do you see what I mean? Like even just within my family, we had very strong judgments about what this meant and what it was. And as I'm telling the story to you right now, you might be thinking, oh, that's BS. That's crazy. They can't do that. What does it matter if blah, blah, blah? Because you're rationalizing in your way, right? But do you see where I'm going here? This is why judgment is such a big deal and why we really need to step back and look at our judgments. So what I did, so let's talk about these steps to become less judgmental. And what I did is I have 8 steps, but I put it into kind of a 4-part framework because I realized that the steps all there was like 4 parts to it with 2 steps in each part. Okay. And that, you know me, I'm going to give you action tips and all the things, but because being less judgmental isn't a one and done fix. It's like a layered process and you build it over time. Like if this thing had happened with my cousins, I don't know, even 10 years ago, I might have been very judgmental about it and very like, that's not okay. And I don't agree. And that's BS. And I don't know what I would have done. Certainly at a different time in my life, I could see having the same reaction as my brother did. I'm just in a very different place now. I've been working on this for a long, long time and I am not perfect. I judge. I judge. Don't even think I don't judge, please. I'm just, not talking about that today. So I want to say that the steps that I'm going to explain can be practiced in any order. I think they follow sort of a natural, I'm going to call it a psychological rhythm from kind of awareness to reframing, to some kind of almost exposure therapy to like the deep repair of it all. So, because that to me is how sustainable change happens, not through judgment of our judgment, but through, curious, compassionate action. Okay. So I've grouped these, and these are 8 research-backed strategies into kind of 4 progressive categories. Okay. So like think of it as a roadmap, shifting from sort of automatic judgment to a more mindful discernment. Okay. All right. So phase 1 is awareness and insight. So the first 2 steps are here in this awareness and insight. And because it all begins with noticing judgment when it comes up and then gently exploring what's underneath. Those are the first 2 steps. So step 1 is the self-awareness, right? Because judgment, as I've said, it's really masking some deeper emotions, some fear, some shame, some insecurity. So the more aware you are of your patterns, the less power those patterns have, okay? And I've done episodes on self-awareness and how to be more self-aware. I gave tons of tips there. I will link to all of that. Again, all the places I link. And of course, getting feedback is probably your best tool, but I'm going to talk about feedback a little later. So in my next ones, but so right here, I'm going to give you a couple things. I went back and looked at the self-awareness. So here's a couple tips I didn't give in there. Okay. But go back there. There's lots of self-awareness tips that are really good. And again, if you don't always want to listen to a whole other episode, I always write a blog post to go along with each episode. So just go to that relationship tips and tools page where it's the same episode. It'll have the same name, same number, same everything. And you can just read it. It'll take you 5 minutes, 10 minutes to read versus listening to an entire episode. If you feel like, I don't want to listen to the whole thing on self-awareness, I just want to read something and get the tips really quick. Go have at it. That's why I do it, because I love you. Okay. So my first tip here with self-awareness that I didn't already say would be to keep I call it a judgment log. I have my clients do this sometimes. So every time you catch yourself judging someone, including yourself, which is probably where you judge the most, you jot down what triggered it and what you were feeling right before. In my masterclass bundle for this, I do that now for every single episode, which is $8 if you're not part of my Patreon community. I have a whole thing that you can track this for 7 days. I have all the things you want to note. I did a whole thing on it. But, if you don't need all that detail, just do what I just said. And the second tip is to use body cues. I'm telling you, your judgment shows up a lot physically before it shows up mentally. I work on this a lot with my clients so you might notice tense shoulders, a tight chest, shallow breathing. you really want to learn to recognize these as early warning signs because they're there, they happen, and it's a great way to notice when you're getting judgmental. Like maybe you always, for me, I clench my jaw and I can feel it, like this tension in my face and my jaw. So think about it. Step 2 under this, we're still in phase 1. Step 2 is to practice some empathy. Empathy doesn't excuse behavior. It puts it in context. Okay. Empathy doesn't excuse behavior. It contextualizes it. It turns labels into questions. It makes space for complexity. So I strongly encourage you to check out, I did a previous episode on empathy. Spoiler alert, it's not the same as sympathy. And a lot of you are confusing the two. Sympathy and empathy are different things. A lot of people are doing empathy completely wrong. So as soon as possible, go back and listen. Okay. Go listen to that. The empathy episode. It's really good. It's very popular episode I've done. Again, read the blog, do whatever, but go do what it says there and go learn what empathy really is. But for now, a couple tools for now, because again, who loves you? Abby loves you. Here's a couple tools for now. You could ask yourself, what might be going on for this person that I can't see? Just ask yourself that. When try to name 3 possible explanations for their behavior. And again, as part of my masterclass bundle, I have a whole thing about taking judgment to curiosity. So if this tip feels good to you, I did a whole thing on that in there, and you could take that farther. But that we're stepping back, we're asking a question. It's a great way to have empathy. And then I would say once a week to expose yourself to, don't expose yourself. Finish that sentence, Abby. I would say to put yourself in front of content from someone with a different point of view than yours. It could be a podcast, a memoir, a documentary, but someone from a different life experience, some of the life experience that's radically different from your own. Let your heart and mind expand. Take a minute to see what that is. Again, it doesn't mean you agree. But it's a way to increase your empathy. It's a way to have a different understanding of different kinds of people, and it really will. It's why travel opens us up in such beautiful ways. When we meet different kinds of people, there's nothing as good to give us some relativity, to give us some help our perceptions. It's so good. So phase 2. So that was phase 1. Those are the 2 steps. Phase 1. Phase 2 is really all about cognitive reframing. So now that you're noticing your judgments, right, and you're being more self-aware, it's time to question and challenge them. Okay. So again, not with shame, but with curiosity. So steps 3 and 4, are all about cognitive reframing. And I did an entire episode dedicated to how to do cognitive reframing. It's called How to Stop Overthinking and Let Things Go That Bother You. How to Stop Overthinking and Let Things Go That Bother You. So if you don't want to go and look under the video or, go back to my website, you just search for that title. I can't say strongly enough. I think that's one of the best episodes I've ever done about how to cognitive reframe. Okay. I strongly suggest you read it or give it a listen. But once again, because I love you, I'm going to give you some additional tips right now. So these are additional to what I shared there. So step 3 would be to challenge your assumptions. So because judgments often show up as assumptions, we've stopped questioning. That's it. There's a great quote by André Gide. He's a French philosopher who says, believe in those seeking truth, doubt those who find it. And I would say, including yourself. Okay. Because when you assume, you stop investigating or asking questions or being curious, right? So when you hear a judgmental thought, a tip here is to ask, what story am I telling myself right now? Is this the only possible explanation? That is, what story am I telling myself right now is or if you hear yourself say something, you can say, well, that's the story I'm telling myself about that. It's reminding you that you're judging, that you have a bias, that there's a way you're thinking about something. And my second tip here would be to use what's called the rule of 3. which is to list 3 alternative explanations for the behavior or the situation you're in, even if they sound unlikely. Okay. Even if it means that, well, this could also be happening because this person's an alien. I get it. Like they're probably not an alien, this person, but believe it or not, the research shows that just even doing this with something that's unlikely or, crazy, it creates something that we call cognitive flexibility, which is really flexibility in your thinking. Just pushing yourself to brainstorm and think differently like that. Step 4, okay, we're in phase 2. Step 4 would be mindfulness. Yep. Because mindfulness is about creating a pause between some stimulus and your reaction to it. It's about being present in the moment, non-judgmentally, right? That's the point. Judgment lives in reactivity, but mindfulness really opens a doorway to choice. Oh, that was nice. Mindfulness, that's a bumper sticker right there. Mindfulness, Abby said it first. Mindfulness opens a doorway to choice, right? Because it's teaching you to have a pause button between something that bothers you and your reaction to that thing, okay? So a tip here would be that when a judgmental thought arises, you can just label it. You don't have to do it out loud. Just label it in your head. That's a judgment. Take a slow, nice, deep, gentle breath in, slow breath out, and notice your body before responding. Okay, that's a judgment. The second thing you could do is practice a daily body scan. This body scans strengthen your ability to tolerate discomfort, which is generally the hidden driver of judgment. And I'm going to give something really great here. I have something called the Golden Light Body Scan. It takes about 7 minutes to do. It's me doing like a visualization. Regular body scans take about 20 minutes. The Golden Light Body Scan takes about 7. And I am going to link to it as the special, wonderful, because I love you giveaway for today, this Golden Light Body Scan. Okay. So we'll, I'm sure, post it on YouTube so you can just listen. You don't even have to put in your email, I think, for this one. You can just like go listen. But it's a really good one and it'll help. I promise it'll help with this. Okay. And it's very relaxing and enjoyable, at least as people tell me. All right. Now we're up to phase 3. Okay. Which is the exposure and expansion. That's what I'm calling this phase. All right. So wait, I have to have a sip of water. Excuse me. Whenever I'm coughing at you, it's time for a sip of water. All right. Once you've built awareness, okay, you built awareness, you've practiced reframing. Now you're going to challenge your, the echo chamber in your head. Okay. And now it's time to kind of stretch your worldview. And now we're going to be at steps 5 and 6. Okay. Step 5 is you got to educate yourself, because I have to tell you, ignorance to me and judgment go hand in hand. I say with all the love in my heart, but I think that judgmental people are just not educated enough and not self-aware enough overall. All right. So the more you understand about others, the more you understand about yourself, the less reactive you'll be. So I would say my tip here, once a month, read, once a week, once a day, read, listen to, watch something. And this is similar to a tip I already gave you, but I'm going to put it here too. Something from a community or worldview you've historically misunderstood or judged. Just do that. I'm telling you, it's going to open it up. Or even something you've just never really understood or know about. And then my second tip here would be to go beyond opinion. Do the friggin' research yourself. You can look in Google Scholar. You can look in PubMed for a peer-reviewed article about a group or an identity that you hold a bias against. And, read it with an open mind. Read the research. See what's what. See what's really there. But again, it should be peer-reviewed research, not, crazy pants Mick Jefferson who's putting out something and sounds good. Find out where people are getting their information. I think the reason I've survived and not just survived, thrived this long in the podcast world, even though I don't advertise. And even though, you've never seen a Facebook ad or an Instagram ad about this. I don't even have a big social media following, but I have a huge podcast, is because word of mouth, and people know I bring the goods. I'm going to have research about, it's not just stuff Abby thinks. And even when it's not in research, it's because I've already found even if I don't give it to you in the moment, it's because, a few episodes back, I can point you to where I got the research, right? And I would say the third thing, what I would really do here, I don't recommend books a lot. You know that. I really don't. And I would say there's an author, Jonathan Haidt. If you're listening, Jonathan, I love you. Love you so much. He's amazing. He more recently wrote something called The Anxious Generation, which if you're a parent of a kid, a young kid or a teenager, that's absolutely required reading. But he wrote a book a while ago now he wrote The Happiness Hypothesis way back, which is amazing. I recommend it to everybody. But he also wrote a book that I highly recommend called The Righteous Mind. I'll link to it, but you can go look it up yourself. It will completely change how you think about other people you previously didn't understand. I reread it after this last election here in the United States because I have just been, depressed and having a hard time. I still am having a very hard time. And I reread it again to really help me in my understanding of what is happening and what has happened here in the United States. And it's still informing me, still helping me. It's an amazing book. I, again, highly recommend it. Step 6 is to reflect on your personal biases. You can't change what you won't name, right? You can't change what you won't name. And uncovering your biases, it's not about guilt. It's not about feeling ashamed or embarrassed. It's about growth. So what I would highly recommend here, I'm highly recommending a lot today, aren't I? But there's a great test. It's called the Implicit Association Test. It's from Harvard. I heard Harvard's good. They seem to be a good school. I think it's from their project on like race, gender, and age or something. I forget where it's in, but I'll link to it, or you can look it up yourself. It's called the Implicit Association Test, but I will link to it in all the places I link, IAT. And you can take the test. And the key, take the test, but then let the results inform you, not shame you. And I can tell you that is an eye-opening in important ways. And I grew up in a home very entrenched in the civil rights movement. I grew up with a real civil rights activist mom and family. I'm like my aunts, my cousins, I'm in a family where there's different colored people and different religions and all kinds of things. Okay. Very open. I've dated and been in relationships with different gendered people and different people of different origins, backgrounds, colors, race, whatever you want to call it. I totally am. I played with dolls of different color when I was a kid. I mean, this is back in the 60s. My mother was doing this, we routinely had people of different color in my home. Like, I feel like I grew up as open as you can in that way. Gay and lesbian, all of it. And yet when I took that test, I was like, oh, because there's always things that you don't realize. Do you know what I mean? That you're not even understanding that you're getting wrong. I'll tell you, one of the things that made me crack up when I came out here to California, I kept asking where Puerto Rican food was. And because I grew up in the East Coast, New York, lots of Puerto Rican food, love Puerto Rican food, think it's delicious. Here on the West Coast in California, it's very hard to find Puerto Rican food. There's a lot of Mexican food. I don't enjoy Mexican food. I'm sorry. Don't hate me. Okay. It's not, I can eat some of it, but I don't like cilantro and I don't like jalapeno. I know those were not flavor profiles I grew up with. I'm also the person, cilantro tastes like soap to me, that whole genetic thing. Anyway. So, but beyond that, I didn't grow up, Puerto Rican food is not hot and spicy like Mexican food is. It's very different food. So, but people, I can't tell you how many people I would say, oh, is there, hey, can you point me to a good Puerto Rican restaurant? And I got pointed to Mexican restaurants over and over. And I'm like, do people not understand that these are vastly different cultures? Like, it is crazy to me, just this. But that's, you know, that's racism. To not even think like, oh, Puerto Rican and it's Latin, I guess you could say, or so, I don't even know what big global term you'd use. But you know what I mean? Like there's these very small ways that you don't realize maybe that you have biases. And here I'm talking about race and culture and things, but there's other kinds of biases too. And so really it's a great idea. There's other ways we judge. So it's a great idea to, again, take the test, you'll see. And then I would take the test and then track, one bias for a week. When does it show up? What triggers it? What story are you believing in those moments? It's great idea. Okay, great idea. Again, this will help you in your relationships where you're just judging, like the example I gave of my brother judging my cousin, or what was happening. Like all these ways that we judge, it's all connected. All right, phase 4, our final phase, okay, is all about accountability and healing. So because this phase is about really kind of the external mirrors and the internal repair, okay? So you invite, I want you to invite feedback and heal whatever wounds, or I hate using that word, but you know what I mean, whatever's there that needs to be healed, that made the judgment feel necessary in the first place. So step 7 is to seek feedback. You can't see your own blind spots, but other people can. I've done an entire episode on how to identify your relationship blind spots. So I would check that out. But as I mentioned previously, feedback gives you clarity without needing to like stumble around in the dark, right? So asking for feedback, feedback's huge. So a tip, of course, would be to ask a trusted friend or partner. Do I come across as judgmental sometimes? Can you share an example? Then listen. Don't defend. Don't rebut. You can also ask for 2 things the person thinks you do well and 2 things they think you could improve or work on. There's ways to ask about this. The second thing tip I would give here is in a group or work settings, ask for structured feedback on how you listen, on how you respond, on how you engage. Let people reflect your impact back to you. It is a great way to get better at judgment. It really, really is. And then I'd say my final step would be to get professional help if you needed. Judgmental patterns often stem from early environments where we were judged, we were shamed, we were taught perfectionism as protection, and therapy can really help you meet those roots of pain with some healing, okay? So you can ask a therapist about modalities, that treat judgment really well, like internal family systems, compassion-focused therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT, schema therapy. There's a lot of them. They all help kind of soften the inner criticism and judgment in a very specific way, right? You could also, another tip is you can try some journaling around this subject. Use some prompts. What judgments did I grow up hearing the most? About myself, about others, that kind of thing. Whose voice is that really? Again, if you aren't in my online membership, the One Love Collective, they get all the prompts, all that stuff included. But if this is a big issue for you, maybe you don't want to go to therapy or whatever, I would lovingly suggest buying the masterclass bundle for today's episode. Again, it's $8. And I'm going to wrap up in 1 second, and I'll list all the things that come in the bundle in case you're not sure if you want it or not. Okay. So let me wrap up. What do I want to say? I want to say progress, not perfection. That's what I want to say to you. Becoming less judgmental isn't about never having a critical thought again. It's about recognizing those thoughts and choosing a different path. It's, again, progress, not perfection. Judgment often shows up when we feel disconnected, when we feel afraid, overwhelmed. So the antidote isn't more shame. The antidote is awareness. It's curiosity. It's compassion. And when you shift from judging to understanding, when you shift from labeling to listening, you don't just change your relationships, you're changing your relationship with yourself, which is really, I think, what this podcast is all about. And everything begins with that, right? Everything begins with your relationship with yourself. All right. So that is it for today. If you don't want to hear what's included in today's masterclass bundle or what the different tiers are getting, we're going to sign off. And I hope you have an amazing week. And if you want to stick around, here we go. So definitely, I would say no matter what, check out that 7-minute kind of golden light body scan. But let's talk about what tier 1 my inner circle is getting this week. You're getting a question checklist for discernment versus judgment. It's really, to me, asking yourself these questions will help you figure out if you're being judgmental or discerning. Is it healthy or unhealthy? There's, of course, some journaling prompts. I think I call it unpacking your judgment triggers. So it's to help you understand your triggers for judgment. And then I have a worksheet called Spot the Judgment Worksheet, right? Again, all these are to help you get better at your issues with judgment. Tier 2 gets the Love Accelerator, gets everything in Tier 1. Plus, I have conversation starters for speaking to others about their judgment. If there's judgment in any relationship you have, I think the best way to extinguish it is to discuss it without blame, without shame. And these are questions that are really meant to prompt open conversations about judgment. So, hopefully you can have some new understanding with this person. I also created a guided visualization for releasing your inner critic. So you get that if you're in Tier 2. And then Tier 3, which is the VIP Love Lab, which gets everything in Tier 1 and Tier 2. I created a letter template to write to your inner critic. So writing kind of a letter to your inner critic, which I've done with some private clients. It's really effective. And then I have a mindset reframe chart, taking you from judgment to curiosity. Okay. So this idea of judgment, like what's judgment? I'm constantly trying to show you what's discernment, what's judgment, what's curiosity, so you can really understand where all this sits. Things that you probably thought were just you being curious are actually, maybe it's too judgmental and you want to look at it. And then finally, there's a judgment journal. It's a 7-day log for tracking your judgment to really help you track and hopefully find some triggers. Okay. And again, all of that would be included in the masterclass bundle if that's something you want to get. That is it for this week. Thank you for writing in, telling me your questions. Please continue to do that. Abby@abbymedcalf.com. I love it when you let me know topics you want to hear about, or even if it's a topic I've done before, but you want an update, maybe with a new angle, let me know. As always, I feel so grateful to be here with you every week. So grateful to be with you here every week. I love you so much. Have an amazing week. And I'll be here soon.